Low ferritin causes many frustrating symptoms like fatigue and hair loss, but it can also cause your cortisol levels to skyrocket. Keep watching to find out how to replenish stubborn low ferritin and lower cortisol at the same time. Most people don't think about low ferritin and high cortisol as being connected, but they are. That's because low ferritin negatively impacts something called the cortisol clearance rate, meaning that your body doesn't clear out free cortisol fast enough, causing it to build up in your bloodstream and trigger symptoms like anxiety, trouble focusing, sleep problems, and even weight gain. We'll get into the specifics of this process in a minute, but in order to understand this connection, and to tell if low ferritin is driving high cortisol symptoms in your body, you need to understand what ferritin is, and you need to understand how to measure and analyze free cortisol, metabolized cortisol, and free cortisone. I like to call this one hidden cortisol. But don't worry, I'm going to break all of this down for you and then put the puzzle pieces back together so that you can assess your own cortisol clearance rates and also use evidence-based functional medicine strategies to raise low ferritin and boost those clearance rates to finally balance your cortisol levels at the root cause. Let's get into it. Ferritin is a protein that stores iron in your cells, safely transports it in the blood, and releases it when your body needs more iron to do important things like make your red blood cells and bind active thyroid hormone to receptors. We need ferritin because while iron is a super helpful micronutrient for your body, free iron is actually toxic to your cells, so it needs to be bound up or buffered when it's stored. That's ferritin's job, to keep a reserve of iron that's ready to go when your body needs it without exposing your cells to harmful free iron. When you have adequate iron in your blood, but not enough ferritin, we call it latent iron depletion, or sometimes iron deficiency without anemia. So when we measure your levels of ferritin in the blood plasma, we get a sense for how much of a backup stash of iron your body has at its disposal, as opposed to only measuring iron in your blood directly, which is more common than measuring ferritin. Even if your iron blood test comes back within the normal range, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have enough reserve iron, stored as ferritin, to maintain all of the functions of your body that require it. Low ferritin is frustrating for several reasons. It's frustratingly common. An estimated 2 billion people suffer from it across the world. Given that ferritin is the most sensitive biomarker for assessing iron stores, it's frustrating that most doctors don't bother to check it, even when their patients have common symptoms of low ferritin. It can be frustrating to try to increase low ferritin levels. And low ferritin causes lots of frustrating symptoms, including hair loss, fatigue, weakness, headaches, anxiety, depression, poor focus, and even hypothyroid symptoms because of the role that iron has in converting thyroid hormone from its inactive form to its active form. If you have symptoms like these, it's a good idea to test ferritin via blood work. Sometimes you can ask your primary care doctor to order this test for you, especially if you tell them that you're feeling fatigued or you have other symptoms associated with low iron levels. But be sure to specifically mention ferritin, otherwise you might just end up with an iron test, which is not the same. If you'd like to order your own ferritin blood test, you might be able to do so through my website. I'll put a link in the video description for more info about this option. For reference, I like to see optimized ferritin levels of 70 to 300 micrograms per liter for males and 70 to 150 for females, unless they have thyroid disease, in which case that bottom number goes up to a minimum of 100 micrograms per liter. So let's say you get your ferritin levels tested and they're lower than optimal. How can you tell if they're messing up your cortisol levels, and why does it matter? Well, cortisol is a chronic stress hormone that's made and secreted by the adrenal glands. How much cortisol you make and circulate is determined largely by the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, in response to stress. That stress could be mental or emotional. It could be a threat or a perceived threat, or it could be a physical stressor, like inflammation in your digestive tract, high blood pressure, or low ferritin levels. People often forget about these physical stressors because we've been conditioned to think of stress as all in our heads. But the body treats all stressors the same, as a threat to survival. And all stressors create real biochemical changes in the body, including changes that cause very real physical symptoms like hormone imbalance, mood changes, sleep problems, and fat gain or weight loss resistance. Let's let that sink in for a minute. Even if your life is calm, cool, and collected, you could still be dealing with elevated cortisol levels because of low ferritin. You could be basking on the beach of a desert island and still be stressed on a physical level if your iron stores are low. That's because when iron and ferritin are suboptimal, cortisol metabolism goes down. In fact, metabolism in general decreases because you aren't able to get oxygen to your cells as well when iron and ferritin levels are suboptimal. And when cortisol is not metabolized efficiently, it results in a sluggish cortisol clearance rate, leaving you with a potential for elevated free cortisol in your bloodstream. The great news is that now you can measure this crucial biomarker via an at-home urine test called the Dutch test. And just so you know, this is a really exciting, brand new measurement for the Dutch report as of this year. And I can tell you from experience that it's a huge value add when it comes to getting at the root cause of cortisol dysfunction. But you're not going to get your cortisol clearance rate from a blood or saliva cortisol test, because in order to calculate it, you need to know more than free cortisol levels. You need to also know your metabolized cortisol levels and your free cortisone levels. Let's take a look. When the adrenal glands make cortisol, it's released into the bloodstream as free cortisol. And free cortisol levels rise and fall at different parts of the day and night. They're very integrated into your circadian rhythm or sleep-wake cycle. But free cortisol can also be interconverted to free cortisone. It's an inactivated form of cortisol. And a lot of factors impact how much free cortisol versus free cortisone your body has hanging around. And, like I mentioned before, free cortisol can also be metabolized or cleared out of the body via the urine. When we use the Dutch test to measure cortisol levels, metabolized cortisol is often a good measurement of total cortisol production over the course of the day, depending on cortisol clearance. So, when we compare how much cortisol has been metabolized or cleared to the amount of free cortisol and cortisone in your body, we get the cortisol clearance rate, which we can see on the Dutch test as a slider bar. If the slider bar is further to the right, it means cortisol clearance is happening faster. If it's further to the left, it means the clearance rate is lower or happening more slowly. This is what we see when ferritin is low, a slower cortisol clearance rate. Other things that cause a slow cortisol clearance rate are hypothyroidism, liver disease, and mitochondrial dysfunction. What does this mean for free cortisol levels? Well, if cortisol isn't being metabolized or cleared fast enough because of low iron stores, you may see higher free cortisol levels, which can then trigger high cortisol symptoms like anxiety, sleep problems, restlessness, irritability, and sometimes weight gain. Even if your total cortisol production isn't too high, low ferritin can slow down your clearance rate, and you can still have the symptoms of too much cortisol production due to free cortisol levels being elevated. This is one of the reasons that I always recommend the Dutch test when measuring cortisol levels. There's just too much that you can miss with the blood or saliva test that isn't taking into account factors like cortisone and metabolized cortisol. The good news is that we help people all over the world get access to the Dutch test for cortisol and other hormones too. And I'll even help you interpret your results. I'll put more info in the video description so that you can get your Dutch test ordered ASAP. So let's say you test your ferritin levels and they're below that optimal range, potentially slowing your cortisol clearance and leaving you with high free cortisol. Well, you got to get those ferritin levels up, and it's not always as easy as eating more spinach or taking an iron pill. Raising iron stores can be really tricky. Here are my favorite evidence-based functional medicine strategies for raising your suboptimal ferritin levels. If you've checked your ferritin levels and find them to be suboptimal, you will likely need a concentrated, high-quality, absorbable iron supplement. My recommended ferritin-building product has a few distinct qualities. It contains a chelated form of iron, which makes it easier to absorb and less likely to cause digestive upset. It also contains several cofactors, specifically other micronutrients that are required for proper utilization of iron by the body, like methylated B vitamins. You'll find details about my approved supplement in the free ferritin boosting checklist. And I'll even include a link where you can order it at a really nice discount. Because an acidic environment is best for absorbing iron, it can be useful to take a supplement with digestive enzymes and betaine HCl to create an ideal gastric environment for absorbing iron. Also, taking vitamin C with your iron helps increase its absorption. Every little bit counts. Another strategy that I find helpful for raising ferritin is to support specific strains of bacteria in the gut. I think of these friendly bugs like micronutrient doormen because they help ease iron's entry through the intestinal wall. One of the specific strains that has been found to boost ferritin is Lactobacillus plantarum. One study found that a probiotic containing this strain increased iron absorption by 50%. Again, you'll find all of my favorite supplements for low ferritin in the ferritin boosting checklist. And I'll put some info about self-ordering options for ferritin labs in case your doctor isn't willing to draw them for you. You can find the link to the checklist in the video description, along with a link to learn more about ordering your Dutch test so you can evaluate your cortisol clearance rate as well. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing to my channel. And be sure to check out the video description for all the free resources and discounts that I mentioned. You'll definitely want to take advantage of those. I think that about wraps it up for now. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.